in a very animated way for him about American democracy and the risks it faces.
Echoing the same exact language used in Nazi Germany. He proudly posts on social media the words that best describe his 2024 campaign, quote, revenge, quote, power, and quote, dictatorship. There's no confusion about who Trump is, what he intends to do.
No, I think actually that what Biden's saying there is true. There's no confusion about who Trump is. And the reason this is such a difficult strategy for Joe Biden, of course he wants to make the election about Donald Trump. The last thing you want to do is make it about Joe Biden. No one likes Joe Biden, or very few Americans like Joe Biden. The only chance they have is to try and say that Trump is a Hitler figure. The problem they have is that Trump was actually already president for 4 years. People watched as he did not build death camps. He did not haul minorities into prisons. Other than Julian Assange, who is now being prosecuted by the Biden administration, his administration did not imprison journalists or critics of his administration or dissidents. None of this happened. The other irony of all of this is that Joe Biden is actually the president who has spent the last 18 months, almost 2 years now, arming actual Nazis in Ukraine. How many shows have we done documenting the very pervasive neo-Nazi ideology that governs the Ukrainians' most devoted fighters, the Azov Battalion and all those people who appear using Nazi insignia? Those are the actual Nazis, and those are the people that Joe Biden has been arming with lethal weapons for 2 years now. That is the Democratic Party. They see critics of the Democratic Party and they scream Nazi and Hitler, but then they meet real Nazis, like the real deal in Ukraine, and they say, oh, let's arm these people. And that's what the Biden administration has done. Until Israel, that was the most significant foreign policy of the Biden administration, is flooding that country filled with fans of the SS. Remember when the Canadian Parliament wanted to honor a Ukrainian Canadian who fought in World War II against Russia? They ended up quite embarrassed because, like so many of them, it turned out that he was an actual SS fighter. Now, here is John Favreau, who's the former Obama speechwriter. So he was the one who wrote Obama speeches. He's now the host of the popular among Democrats podcast, Pod Save America. And he wrote, quote, you can tell Biden feels this democracy speech deeply. He's animated and passionate. Pretty clear this is why he's running again. Yeah, he's not running for his own interests. He's not running because he's a lifelong politician who doesn't know how to give up power. He's running for you. He's running to save democracy because he so passionately believes in it. Now, as I said, trying to claim that Joe Biden is the only savior of American democracy is not only difficult because people watched Trump for 4 years and they may not have liked a lot of what he did, but they don't think he's Adolf Hitler. But also, it is Joe Biden who is trying to imprison Donald Trump. The thing they said Trump was threatening to do with Hillary Clinton and never did, that is what the Biden administration now, the Justice Department, is trying to do to Donald Trump. They're trying to imprison him. There are 2 cases under the auspices of the Biden Justice Department brought by a special counsel, Jack Smith. They're trying to turn Trump into a felon. On top of that, Democratic Party activist groups and interest groups all over the country are trying to keep Trump off the ballot. So they see polls revealing that more Americans want to vote for Trump as president than any other candidate, and their solution is to prevent Americans from being able to vote for Trump by claiming he committed a crime that he was never even charged with, let alone convicted of, which is insurrection. And then they turn around and they hold themselves up as the saviors of American democracy, the people trying to imprison their political opponent, ban him from the ballot. And then they also, and it's amazing how much this has been memory hold, they were found, the Biden administration was, by 4 federal judges, all 4 who ruled on this question. A federal district court judge in the first instance, and then 3 appellate judges who unanimously affirmed that ruling, found that the Biden administration engaged in what they called one of the gravest assaults on the First Amendment's free speech guarantee in years, if not in the history of the judiciary, they said, by systematically weaponizing the CIA, the FBI, the CDC, and other federal agencies to coerce and threaten big tech to censor dissent from the internet. That was the story that Matt Taibbi and other journalists broke as part of the Twitter files, and you probably remember that most members of corporate media, upon seeing that story that they didn't break and couldn't break, turned around and said, oh, this story is nothing. It's a nothing burger. You should ignore it. Only for courts to then say that it was a grave assault on the First Amendment free speech, that they were trying to censor the free speech rights of American citizens. I know you probably don't remember that because it got so little attention in the media. And barely anyone talks about it anymore because it's a ruling against Joe Biden, and so the media wants to bury it. But for that same administration that got that ruling against them to then turn around and depict themselves as the savior of American democracy and be taken seriously by the media is not really amazing any longer, but it is truly illustrative. Now, even CNN is being very clear about what the Biden strategy is. And again, this is their only choice. From January 2nd, how the Biden campaign hopes to make 2024 less about Biden and more about a contrast with Trump. Quote, the 2024 campaign year for President Joe Biden's inner circle will largely be about carefully ratcheting up the intensity against Donald Trump, wary of voters becoming dulled to what they expect to be the former president's even wilder rhetoric and promises about what he'll do back in power. Or, as some of the younger aides on Biden's re-election campaign have grimly joked, it's about when to go, quote, full Hitler, when the leading Republican candidate's speeches and actions go so far that the Biden team goes all the way to a direct comparison to the Nazi leader rather than couching their attacks by saying Trump, quote, parroted him. Now, again, it's not only that this is the same administration that's trying to imprison their opponent, trying to bar him from the ballot, who is found also to have committed grave First Amendment violations, according to two federal courts, by censoring the dissent of American citizens and their speech from the internet, by threatening big tech companies using the CIA and the FBI. It's also the fact that, as the New York Times even acknowledged in June of 2023, that the Ukrainians that the Biden administration has spent the last almost 2 years now arming with lethal weapons have an extreme fondness for Nazi insignia and Nazi symbols. They revere as national heroes people like Stepan Bandera, who was a collaborator with the Nazis in rounding up Ukrainian Jews and slaughtering Poles. Here's the headline: Nazi symbols on Ukraine's front lines highlight thorny issues of history. And it's all about how many times we've seen Ukrainian militia leaders, Ukrainian political leaders, Ukrainian generals and colonels appearing in the media, even in the West, wearing outright Nazi insignia or having pictures of Nazi collaborators on their wall. I think it's a little bit difficult to try and run in a campaign of accusing your opponent, who used to be the president of the United States, of being a Hitler figure when you've spent 2 years as your primary foreign policy sending some of the most sophisticated weapons in the world to militias and troops who openly embrace not just Nazi symbolism, but neo-Nazi ideology, and who, for a decade before the Russians invaded, were constantly spoken of that way by the Western press, that these were serious Nazi menaces. There was movements in Congress to try and ban the Azov Battalion and others from getting American weapons on the grounds that they were the real Nazis. And then on February of 2022, that narrative switched. The Western media stopped calling the Azov Battalion neo-Nazis, first started calling them far-right, then nationalists, and then running slobbering pieces of hagiography. That's how war propaganda worked. But don't forget what the Biden administration was doing in Ukraine. Don't forget what they've been doing on the internet, according to two federal courts. And don't forget that they're doing exactly the thing that when we look at other countries where it's being done, we instantly conclude those are the hallmarks not of saving democracy, but destroying democracy, namely trying to keep their primary political opponent ahead in the polls off the ballot, and also trying to put him in prison. This seems like a desperate effort to me. For sure, it's going to get cheered by the American media. I think the most interesting part about it, aside from their recognition, the Democrats' recognition, that they cannot run with anyone thinking about Joe Biden, instead trying to make them think about Trump, is the fact that they are going to have an extremely difficult time simultaneously deconstructing democracy out of fear of losing while presenting themselves as the saviors.